U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War ended in 1973 with almost 60,000 American fatalities. The Minnesota Vietnam Veterans Memorial honors the valor and service of the Minnesotans who gave their lives. We're here at the Minnesota Vietnam Veterans Memorial on the state capitol grounds. I'm joined by Paul Mandell of the Capital Area Architectural Planning Board. How did this memorial come to be?
As far back as like '89, they had started radio ads and they were selling T-shirts and they were trying to raise Teresa Vetter, who is from Mankato, one of the people that started along with several veterans that were on the board. And they were basically selling T-shirts, bumper stickers, everything they could do. They did a radio feed and one of the legislators heard it and said, well, you need more money than you're going to make that way, and sponsored a piece of legislation with $300,000. And then over the next few years, we had a design competition. They were thinking small, we were thinking big, because the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C. was so huge. And we convinced them to do a national design competition. So we won the design competitions. And I remember we were thinking we'd get maybe 50 to 80, maybe 100 submitters, and we had over 218 submitters. Quite some wild ideas. We had to dismiss a few that were way out of scale. It was supposed to be a total budget of, I believe, $700,000, and then with the state money, they matched that over time, and we got to where we are today. And it was dedicated in '92.
It's a large plaza in the shape of Minnesota. What do the various elements represent?
Well, you've got the arrival home. You come up the river, Mississippi River, and you arrive at home, which is the limestone remnant of the home building. And then the state of Minnesota is very, one of the concerns when this design was picked was that it was too literal. You have Mississippi River, you have Lake Superior, you have the shape of Minnesota. Over the process of the design, it actually got more literal by adding the towns where people came from, etc. And in the design process, originally, what's limestone was granite, what's granite was limestone in the design, and the name wall was going to be on the wall facing north. And it was pointed out that that would be in the shadow all the time, and the ice during the winter would be piling up. So then it was moved to the north wall facing south, so it'd get the sun. And there was an objection to that because that's represented Canada, the Canadian border, where people fled if they were conscientious objectors. So then, in the result, that was going to be a limestone wall, and now it's granite, and everything else became the limestone. So it was an iterative evolutionary design process that we went through.
Was the idea of the granite wall with the names of those killed or missing in action a nod to the Veterans Memorial, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C.?
I suspect it was. One, because it was so evocative, and it was dark, it was into the ground, it was highly reflective, and people saw themselves. One thing about polished granite is you see yourself in it too, so it's an interactive type thing. In addition, it's more legible when you have polished granite with names, as opposed to, for instance, limestone. In the Workers' Memorial, we had to infill with paint. So I think probably subconsciously for the designers, yes. There were a lot of designs that had no stone, had no granite. They had piles of dirt, or they had guns with the bayonets in the ground with the helmets and stuff like that. But this one probably won because it was a touchstone in effect. But it's also more legible and accessible for people to see from a distance and up close. And you see yourself, and you can also see the Capitol at a certain point in a reflection.
As far as I know, though, the Vietnam War is the first war where there are lists of those who were killed and missing in action. And this is another one of those. That
was intentional. You always see the general on the horses, or the commander of the infantry, or whatever. But Vietnam, it was all, we had the plaques in the Court of Honor, and those recognized by numbers and such like that. But this was, they had a chip on their shoulder because they came back, they were either forgotten or they were spat on, mistreated. The benefits weren't coming forward. Just all around, the nation had abandoned them, basically. And they had been lied to in the war. So they wanted to recognize the common person that fought in the war.
At the top of the wall, there is a portion of a poem by writer and poet Archibald MacLeish that says, "We were young, we have died, remember us." That's a pretty direct statement.
That was chosen by the client group, and the minute it got up on the, well, I think before it even got on the wall, but after it got on the wall, it was very controversial with some of their own people, because the wall includes both those missing and assumed POWs. So they didn't like the fact that it just stopped at "we have died." So the different names are noted by either a filled-in diamond or just a outlined diamond. And as the bodies have been recovered or people have been, the remains have returned, we have the diamonds filled in then to acknowledge that they have died and are accounted for.
Have you heard from people who visit this memorial? What do people say about it? Is it standing the test of time?
I think so. It was interesting. Probably for the first dozen years, they'd have ceremonies here, and all the nations. The Vietnam War involved people from the Philippines and Australia, a number. So you get probably the biggest assortment, other than the World War II. You get the biggest assortment of people from different nationalities. But for the first dozen years, we would hear stories of people that would come in from like the hillside here where we have the larch trees, or the north side where there used to be more poplar trees, and they couldn't get to the wall. Literally, physically could not bring themselves to go to the wall and touch the names. It was such a tragic event in their lives. So they would hang back, and you'd see people hanging back here, and their families or friends might go forward, and they'd like, "No, I'm not ready for that." And slowly, over time, they'd get closer and closer. We heard countless stories like that. And then, in the end, it became so literal, people really just wedded to the design itself. And then when you get to the wall, if you're at the south end of the wall, you see the reflection of the Capitol in the wall, which is really, I don't think it had been accounted for in the design, but it worked out really nice.
And to this day, you still see flags and flowers, as are behind us. People are still coming to remember.
And people, they don't have a museum. Originally, the Veterans Service Building was supposed to have a museum on the other wing that never got built. But they do reclaim anything that's of a permanence. Some people have left medals and important letters and documents, and those are retrieved by the veterans and kept in an archive in the building. I've never seen it, but like the flowers and stuff are just left, but if there's something of permanent value, they will retrieve that and document it and such. This was the first war that was literally fought in our living rooms. And
people watched it on television.
People saw it happening as it happened. People saw the two sides of the story. People saw our nation being torn apart. This gave a process of healing. I remember the controversy in Washington, D.C. when that wall was built. I was working for the federal government 1 block away and watched that being built and watched the people coming and going, this is a terrible memorial, and other people going, this is a wonderful, it's got a wound, our wound is still open. This was a wonderful healing process, and the people that, started the Korean military family tribute, it's always been about the healing. We don't glorify war. We don't politicize war here. We remember those that gave their lives or served. And we honor the sacrifice, but we also honor why they did it. What drove them to do it. Obviously, some people were drafted and had no choice. But the healing that took place over time is always important to remember.